The 2025 FIM Motocross World Championship has stormed on past round 4 of the Grand Prix of Sardinia in the deep sand of Riola Sardo, the first sand appointment of 2025, and as expected, it generated some interesting results, some results different from the norm, and of course we had the return of Jeffrey Herlings to make it even more special. So this will be a slightly different MXGP podcast show with a slightly different look at the results, and we of course have some rather pressing matters to get to, such as the lack of riders in MX2. We actually have legitimate data for this now, so that'll be exciting, and of course at the end we'll talk about Antonio Cairoli's return to MXGP once more at next weekend's Grand Prix of Trentino. But that's all an hour or so away at this point. I am your host, Lewis Phillips, as per usual. And as per usual, I want to thank Polisport and Prox/ProX for all of their support of the MXGP podcast show. Two brands that are really making strides in their respective fields, leaders in their respective fields, and that is why we choose to partner with them and share their messages with you, our loyal listeners, who we really do value, trust, enjoy, embrace. Joining me, who will also embrace, enjoy, trust, and the other word that I used that I can't remember, is Paddock Pass podcast man and published author for 2 weeks, thanks to, I've forgotten the exact title, Insider Stories from Motorcycle Grand Prix. It's Adam Wheeler.
Hello, Lewis. You're getting more professional, more theatrical with these intros every week, I have to say. Compared to the first, you should go back and listen to the first podcast that we did, because I think you would, you probably won't recognize the man that was garbling away at the beginning of these things.
It's a fair point. Honestly, and this is a immediate tangent, when I was at MX Vice and we were going to start doing our first podcast there, it was delayed by like 7 months because I just couldn't muster up the confidence. Like, I was so in my own head. Like, honestly, I put it, like, full disclosure, I put it off for longer than anyone else wanted to, because I was just like, I don't think I'm ready to do a good job. And here we are, trusting and embracing and enjoying and all of those fun words.
Well, seeing as we are going off at tangents already, are we doing a Ben Watson podcast with a bit of MXGP, or is an MXGP podcast with something about Ben?
It's, you know what, we'll leave that open to interpretation. As we know with our wonderful listeners, they all take things in different ways, and some will feel as though it is option, I've forgotten what one, but the option where it is a Ben Watson podcast with a side of MXGP. But what a guy.
Would you rather have a Beta or a Ducati on the start line of an MXGP race?
Well, with all due respect, the Ducati leaves the gate, so that immediately makes it a front runner versus sitting there for 30 seconds for the second Grand Prix in a row.
There's a few talking points, obviously, from this Grand Prix, but your immediate opinion on 2 whole shots by Jeremy Sewer on the Desmo 450 MX, and also managing to wave to, I'm not sure who actually has the credit for the photograph, but taking that whole shot on, giving that gesture like he did. What a man.
Yes, that is so Jeremy. And you know what? I've said this to a few people lately. He's in a good mood. Like last year, when I was texting him, it was a very delicate, like every time I sent a text, I was like, oh, I don't know if I want to be bothering him. Like, it was a deep, dark place. He's in a good mood. He's happy enough. He's plugging along. But 4 out of 8 whole shots for the Ducati. I think Guadagnini has 1 of those. Jeremy has 3. Obviously, there's some criticism for what happened past the first turn. But I think that we need to celebrate 4 out of 8 whole shots, and crucially, the first lap led for a Ducati as well, which is, poignant in itself.
Yeah, definitely. By round 4, I think that's already a distinction. I mean, they're not sort of the whipping boys of the class. Mm-hmm. And it's a shame that Guadagnini was injured. I first found out at the Grand Prix of the Americas MotoGP round, because I saw Paolo Ciabatti there, who's kind of the honcho of the Ducati course MX wing. And he revealed that Mattia had broken several ribs and would be out for, more than a period of weeks, a couple of months. So they've obviously drafted Tony Cairoli in for round 5, the Grand Prix of Trentino. We can mention that a bit later. But, it's a shame because Guadagnini had been reaching decent speed like we'd seen in the Grand Prix of France. and then Sewer as well with that ability to start, which I mean, I always felt that Jeremy was a pretty decent starter, but he never really managed to show it too much on the Kawasaki from memory.
Well, it's heavy, in his opinion. And
Yeah,
it didn't
you know,
turn,
and
so in his opinion, which is a crucial part of the first corner, additionally.
indeed.
But no,
yeah, props. Good to see another brand at the front.
yeah, look, we're really storming along with these manufacturers. We're almost closed for business at this point. We don't have room for anyone else. The
And
rest
also on a quick theme about that, how bizarre was it to see in MX2? Well, not bizarre, I guess it's just indicative of what's happening at the moment. But I think there were 6 Austrian bikes in the top 7, and then Camden McLennan finishing on the podium in Sardinia again on the Triumph. Japanese bikes just struggling in the 250s.
Yeah, I was actually on the phone with someone yesterday talking about this, and I said that the first 2 rounds gave me a glimmer of hope that Yamaha, Honda were maybe making strides, not to the level of the Austrian manufacturers. Of course, they still had a stranglehold on the class, but now 4 rounds in, we have a decent data set, and it feels like more of the same. And what I was debating with this person on the phone is it's bizarre, but also not bizarre, how in America the 250 class is so competitive, so valued, when actually it's a regional series. Arguably, the MX2 class in the FIM Motocross World Championship holds much more standing simply because it's viewed as equal to the 450 class, and yet it just doesn't seem to be clicking for the Japanese. But as the person I was talking to said, maybe it just comes down to the riders. Because if you look at the rider lineups at Honda, Yamaha, Kawasaki has one for the future now, but it's not like you would bet on those riders if they moved to KTM or Husqvarna.
Yeah, it's a strange situation. I mean, the Austrian? I mean, you can argue the Austrian brand are sort of grooming riders to be able to step up into the Premier class, but it doesn't really look the same way. And like Kawasaki just seem to have really dropped off in the performance stakes. It's hard to get a read on what's happening with their 250 program.
I still hold Mathias Valin. I still hold him quite highly based on what I've seen, but equally, I'm well aware that we haven't seen concrete results per se. But Valin will be mentioned later on in our data set for the MX2 starting lineup, so look forward to that.
Kawasaki obviously did win in MXGP.
Yes, and crucially, and maybe overlooked, I think, is the fact that Febvre did not win at all last year. So this was actually his first Grand Prix win since Arnhem, the Netherlands, in the August of 2023, 596 days ago. So that would explain some of the sheer joy and relief on his face on the podium. Obviously, he was consistent podium regular last year, but yeah, that win slipped through his fingers. So good for him to get that monkey off of his back.
It also feels quite strange that it was achieved with like a 4-1. That seems. I mean, just in the high performance ratio that we've seen in the last 1 or 2 years in MXGP. Getting a 4-1. I mean, knowing you, Lewis, you'll probably trawl through the results now and find several instances of riders finishing outside the top 3 and still taking an overall win. But to me, I just thought, even though Febvre rode brilliantly in the second moto, and held off sort of Tim Gajser, who else was pursuing him. I just thought, yeah, Coldenhoff as well. We'll talk about him too. But yeah, it felt good to see Tim's kind of run ended a little bit, just that sort of performance and that speed. And, I don't think Sardinia's always been the strongest track for the multi-world champion. But then Febvre also has been one of those riders that you kind of think, well, is he actually any good in the sand? And if you look back through his results, certainly at Lommel in the Belgian Grand Prix, he's popped up on the podium quite a few times.
Yeah, he's won Lommel, I want to say, twice from memory. Certainly once in the COVID years. I think in 2021, in fact, Lommel was his lone GB win. 2021. We'll get to that as well. That's also in my notes. Also, sidebar, because I actually meant to text you this. Friday, and this is without a lie. This is with no... What am I trying to say? This is not a lie. Friday at a Foxborough Supercross, I'm stood under the KTM tent for an hour with Chase and Tom, and guess what we are doing? we are sat around Lewis's phone watching 2021 MXGP highlights.
God.
And me and Tom are just basically running through round by round and then like informing Chase, and then I'm saying to Tom, but this happened, and Tom's saying, yeah, but then this happened. I had died and gone to heaven. I was in my element.
Was Sexton completely unaware of 2021 MXGP?
No, but he wasn't fully aware of the off-track drama. He was aware of the racing, the quality of racing, but not the soap opera that was round to round, which was 2021.
It's possible also they were so scared of the weather forecast for the Supercross coming up that they just wanted to get distracted in some fabled MXGP action.
If you had a camera on me, the second 2021 MXGP came up, mood changed, focus suddenly. I was locked in like a 15-second board had been raised because I knew that was my moment in the sun. But anyway, back to 2025 MXGP of Sardinia. To your point about the 4-1, this did cross my mind. I feel like, let's say in the 2010s, in the 2000s, a 4-1 was a fairly common route to a Grand Prix win. But it's gone away a little bit. And I don't know what that is, other than maybe the fact that the quality of riders is getting so high that the podium contenders are more assured. But the 4-1, once famous, has certainly fallen from its glory years, which is sad.
Well, listen, let me throw another question at you. Did Romain Febvre win this Grand Prix, or did Lucas Coenen lose it? Because that first moto was, pure authority. And it was a complete contrast to the rider, understandably so, who kind of bottled things at the 2024 Belgian Grand Prix at Lommel, where we really didn't get to see, where we only saw flashes of his, sand capabilities. But then, he was impressive, I thought, on Saturday, when Febvre, had sort of a nightmare with a broken rear wheel or something. He had a worst possible qualifying race that you could have, which makes his feat as well on Sunday even more admirable. But then, Coenen was fantastic in the first moto and, just fluffed his lines. He said that he was hit on the inside of the first turn at the start of the second moto. But if you look kind of from the replays, it's hard to really judge it. For me, it just looks like he catches his handlebar on the inside of that bank and goes down. And then I think he was slightly aggrieved at the fantastic, I say fantastic just for the TV image, the shot of him almost colliding with Jeremy Sue over the jump. Followed by the drone. I mean, he seems to indicate that Sue changed his line, went from left to right over the jump. But then if you look at it again a few times, and I did, and Coenen was obviously, he's also on the right and he veers towards the center of the jump and he kind of, kicks out the rear wheel trying to sort of correct himself. So it was pretty much, I'd say, like a Jeffrey Herlings, Jorge Prado thing where they both sort of came together and there was nobody that could really be blamed as such. But then that was the end of his moto. I think he's lucky he didn't get injured, because then I think he fell off again.
I just realised I left the Herlings Prado incident out of my 2021 highlight reel with Chase.
Oh, how can you do that? That was that was the moment that Prado sort of ruled himself out of the title chase.
Every cloud, Adam. That now means there's cause for a part 2 to this discussion.
Right, okay.
Coenen was certainly, I think, pissed at Jeremy for that second moto incident, but I would just chalk it up as a racing incident. And as you hinted at, if I were to put blame, maybe I'd go like slightly 1% over into Lucas's side. I think Jeremy was fairly in his line and not really doing anything too egregious. But
he was ahead as well.
Yeah, there is that element as well. Maybe it was just a case of Lucas feeling as though he had authority simply because he was faster and Moto 1 winner, and maybe he felt as though the other riders should get out of his way as he stormed to the front. But circling back to Febvre quickly, the 2 points. One, what you mentioned about the qualifying race with the wheel issue, and then Maxime Renault had a bike issue in the qualification race as well. Watching that, it was those moments that made me kind of fall back on my preseason prediction, because yes, it comes down to pure bad luck, I do genuinely believe, but you don't see that stuff happen to Tim or Honda HRC. Now, admittedly, you can pull up the foot peg from China last year, but that to me, is an anomaly, and you can't find another instance of that. Whereas, for whatever reason, the anvil seems to fall on both Febvre and Renault more than either rider would like.
I think it's just coincidental, right? I mean, also it's the toughest Grand Prix test for the bike so far. Okay, I mean, take into conditions what happened in Spain and the deluge of rain and everything, that kind of cost that it has on the mechanical side. But yeah, Renault is another case where you think, what kind of how many black cats have you run over, mate? Because the luck is just the misfortune is startling. And Febvre managed to turn his around, which, as we mentioned, is admirable. But I asked a question about Coenen because he's been slowly getting better. I mean, after winning the qualifying race in France and then also finishing on the podium for the first time, winning that first moto. I mean, the guy is on an impressive fast streak to the top. I even saw on social media some comments along the lines of, has Kai de Wolf made quite a serious career error in staying down in MX2 one more year? When you see how Coenen has been able to adapt and make an imprint already in the Premier class, each has his own reason for moving or staying in a respective category. But Coenen undisputably is the new star at the moment in MXGP. I would sort of mirror his impact along with like Prado in 2020, also in Renault in 2023, yeah, that wasn't the season he was injured. But yeah, I mean, there are some of the Lucas moments from 2024 are still there, as we saw, and maybe we can talk about the Coenens in a minute because they do scare me in their approach to racing. I really hope they manage to get more than 2 to 3 years on their professional careers before something goes awry, because they really are, pinning the throttle and holding on for all it's worth. But maybe we need to give them more service or more credit. I'm not sure.
Yeah, that is a debate. You just made me think of something. Renault is very much Febvre 2.0, winning their sole world title, and then in the years that followed, showing some incredible flashes of just raw pace and ability, but for whatever reason, issues, injuries, it just doesn't really come back around. Renault certainly feels like Febvre of 7 years prior, or whatever you want to label it as. Do you see those similarities, or am I out to lunch?
Yeah, but then I think it is just a little bit of the roulette wheel of injury, isn't it? That always catches up. I mean, for Prado, for example, it was COVID and also the broken femur before his Premier Class debut in 2020. Until then, he had been picture perfect in MX2. I mean, barely any injuries, ridiculous form. And Maxim's had his issues. I mean, a broken arm, his shoulder problem. Obviously, this serious sort of foot ankle injury that caused Jeffrey Herlings to miss the better part of a season and a half with respective surgeries. But I think it's a fair point because it does seem there was a little trend for a while of riders coming into MXGP burning incredibly bright and then having to go through all that kind of shit that motocross can throw at riders after a while, whether it is injury or a sort of loss of form or a team switch or a manufacturer just kind of adjusting the technical platform and it taking some time to get competitive again.
Yeah, interesting. A final point on Febvre before we move on. How many Grand Prix wins do you think Kawasaki have had with their 450 now?
With 450?
Clue, Febvre's win marked somewhat of a landmark, a round number.
He's got 22 now or something, wasn't it? Judging by the pool mailing.
21 in 450s plus 1 in MX2.
Yeah, I mean, you can always rely on Paul for statistical analysis. Up there with your good self, of course, both with your freaky Excel sheets. But Kawasaki wins, I'm going to say you have to count half a dozen or less for Clement de Sau. Chalk up one for Billy McKenzie. I would say Gautier Paulin probably had 4 or 5.
Yeah.
Then I'm struggling a little bit. And then Febvre Christophe Pourcel, yeah.
Seb had one as well.
Yeah, Sebastian Pourcel dominated. I think it was 2007 Faenza. Kawasaki wins. I'll say 15.
Oh well, exactly half. Febvre was their 30th with the 450.
Oh wow.
Higher, well,
30? Okay.
obviously higher than you thought. But and yes, higher than I thought. But still, when I look at that number compared to the other manufacturers, I'm like, we need to get it together here, guys, and start boosting these figures, because in comparison, Suzuki with their 450 is at 28. So the fact that we're just eclipsing Suzuki is not good for anyone.
What's the update on Paul's Jonas?
Oh yes, of course, we need to mention that as well. It's a hard crash in free practice on Saturday, heavy concussion, had a headache for a while, but I was messaging him shortly after, so he was coherent and able to use his phone, which I think is a worthwhile update. But no, genuinely, because
he didn't think he was messaging his aunt or something.
Well, maybe no, but like genuinely, like when a rider has a concussion, you don't know, do you? Like you don't know if they're going to go on their phone for 2 days. So I think that means something. I double checked. There is no concern about any bones or other injuries, simply his head. So I would bet that Trentino and maybe even Switzerland will come too soon. But after this triple header, he'll certainly be back, and maybe even Switzerland. But Trentino certainly, I think, too soon. But yeah, we wish Paul's well, of course. We like Paul's here on this podcast, friend of the show. Yes. So where would you like to go from here? Would you like to tackle your Coenen question? We haven't really given Tim or Glenn their attention thus far. So do you want to do that quickly?
Well, just give me your opinion on Lucas Coenen. I mean, do you think he's going to be too error prone? He's still very much in the learning phases of the MXGP class, or is a win likely to happen next week, for example?
I think a win is likely to happen sooner rather than later, but I think that both of the two things that you said can both be true, because a win can be coming too very, very soon, but then also he can make too many errors to replicate that. So I think that in amongst multiple crashes and mistakes, there will be a win soon, if that makes sense.
Also, another friend of the show, Rasmus Jorgensen, victorious again in MX2 class with Kai de Wolf, team manager of the Nestaan Husqvarna team. He pointed out that, Lucas would win races this year if he engaged his MX2 mode of being able to start well and get out. I think he had something like a 6-second lead after like 2 laps in Sardinia, and that was kind of the Prado-esque race approach, and it worked. But if he still made a mistake at the end, didn't he? I mean, he squandered like an 11-second lead, and it gave some brief hope to I think it was like Coldenhoff. I can't remember who else was chasing him now.
Bonacorsi.
Bonacorsi, yes, of course, the 2 Fantics. Yeah, I don't know. But I mean, that also means it's going to be fun to watch, because while Lucas is undoubtedly brilliant, and I think there'll be a lot of people impressed by what he's doing, there are those little moments of kind of impetuosity, which means it's he could be chucking some results down the road.
Yeah, while some choose to stick to the status quo, I think that Lucas is a nice curveball for the MXGP class full of veterans. You know what you're getting from Gajser, Coldenhoff, Febvre. Throwing Lucas in amongst that mix is certainly exciting. And I said this to someone Sunday, and I think I'll walk it back a little bit now. But I said, if I had to, without doubt, Gajser has won this title, and congratulations to him. We know my feelings on this. But I said, if I had to bet on a rider giving him a long shot for the championship, it would be Lucas more so than Febvre or Renault at this point. Because I think
I disagree.
I think I disagree now as well. I think this was pre-Sunday's results, so I think I disagree now as well. But my point at the time was, of all the riders, I would bet on Lucas being the one to maybe reel off 4 GP wins in a row, and in the process cut 20 points out of the lead,
Yeah, I would file Lucas away as a rider more likely to surprise, whereas Febvre, I think, just has far too much experience. And, I wouldn't say that sand is also his strongest terrain, but he's still able to, get that second motor win and then grab the overall. So I think Romain's going to be right in it. He's going to be Gajser's closest threat all the way. And then I would put Lucas just a little bit ahead of, say, the likes of Glenn Coldenhoff, somewhat surprisingly, Ruben Fernandez, these riders that can suddenly, pop up with a weird result where you think, well, where did that come from? I mean, Renault, I have no idea what his fitness or his headspace is now, because he's dealing with fresh setbacks. but you imagine that his confidence has taken a bit of a hit. He needs to sort of win something quickly, whether it's a qualifying race, just a moto here or there to get things back on track.
Yeah, so update on Renault. He had a bike problem in Saturday's qualifying race and then crashed in Moto 1 early, I want to say like the third lap, after a bad start. He finished that race, I think 17th was his score.
Yeah, 4 points, I think, got a couple.
Yeah, 17th, 4 points. And then after the race, he was spitting blood, and the medical team wouldn't let him line up for Moto 2 because of that. I don't really know what spitting blood is indicative of.
Well,
punctured lung?
Chest injury, perhaps. Yeah.
So,
it's quite annoying that, it can't be specific with these injuries. It just leads to more conjecture. I mean, why would you not say, a hit to the torso or something like that? Because then I mean, Guadagnini has broken his ribs, but, it's not like a mystery illness or whatever that leads people to speculate when he's going to be back.
Yeah, agreed. Although someone did reach out to me after our France podcast and said the reason why riders like Lucas and Maxime do not disclose their injuries pre-race is because the FIM wouldn't let them race. For those that don't know, essentially, how would I describe this? On the Friday of each Grand Prix, if you have a noted injury, you have to go to the medical rig and at a certain time, I think it's like 4 p.m, and get cleared by the FIM to race. So if you say on a Tuesday said, I've broken my wrist, the FIM would note that, and then you would be called to this medical session, which I see, but I don't fully agree with because...
Yeah, what do we think about that? Ethical or not? I mean, I think you should have to pass a basic kind of fitness test. It's the same with Paul's and his concussion. There has to be some sort of baseline before he shouldn't be able to say, yeah, I feel great, and then travel to Arco di Trento when, he's making 2 + 2 = 5.
But equally, my rebuttal to that was we all knew that Coenen had broken his arms, wrists pre-Argentina. That was well known. So because it wasn't officially disclosed, the FIM are just like Bird Box with a blindfold on. Like, we don't know this. We don't know, Like,
well, no, it wasn't made official, was it?
But like, if the FIM are on this, then you would know that rumours and be like, hey, Lucas, we need to check you out. Like, we've heard this. Can we just clarify how bad this is and if you're a danger?
No, but then you're absolved of all responsibility if there's no official pronunciation of injury, because you can say, no, it's just internet rumors. My wrists are fine. I mean, we're talking about a really obscure and rare situation, but I mean, riders must do it. I mean, they must sort of park the campers in the paddock thinking, I'll be lucky to get some points this weekend if I just keep shush, especially if they're in like some sort of prominent position in the championship. But I just do wonder, question the wisdom of it all.
I know of a rider who hit his head on day 1 of an event fairly recently and then darted around the paddock like a madman to avoid himself being hunted down by the officials so that he couldn't be checked. And by the time he would get checked, he would be more coherent and clear the results. And it worked. So there are different ways to dip, dive, duck and dodge these situations. But yeah, I don't know. I mean, again, I see that point of view, but also I think that's a bit of a bizarre take. But that is actually an interesting element of MXGP that I don't know if we've mentioned before. I remember Matterley one year for the GP, just strolling through the paddock, and outside the medical centre there were like 15 riders just huddled up talking. That's kind of the optics of the situation that this creates. It really is just like a doctor's office.
Sometimes we lambast MXGP on this podcast for being a bit amateurish. Maybe this is something that also needs to be corrected. There needs to be more formality to it. Again, let's take our staple MotoGP comparison. The world champion is aiming to race for the first time this weekend in Qatar, and he has to go and do a mandatory fitness test when he gets to the Losail International Circuit. And MotoGP also as well has a paddock, health center where riders are, can receive treatment. They have checkups and everything else. MXGP has, a similar kind of facility on a smaller scale, but I think it's difficult to keep secrets in the MXGP paddock, especially about injuries. But then the way to make it more formal and official is also very murky. I don't really sort of know how we can process this. But the thing is, what do you do if you're Maxim, Renault, and Yamaha? Do you start being more earnest with your communication, or do you just try and cover things up? But it's fair to say he's pretty much out of the championship hunt now, isn't it?
Yeah,
So
how
there's no
wild is
agenda
that?
there.
Your red plate holder 1 round ago has taken part in every Grand Prix and now faces a deficit of 90 points. How quickly things can change. Like, that's a wild swing. So we're 30 minutes in. I want to get to the MX2 gates. We haven't even mentioned Jeffrey Herlings yet, which shame on us. We need to talk about Cairoli.
Right. I'm going to take over for a moment and go to the next subject. And I want to know how much you rate Glenn Coldenhoff in 2025. Is this guy going to be a title man?
Title man, no, but I rate him extremely highly, and I don't believe he gets enough credit for what he's doing. And I think that Kevin Strybos, Louis Vosters, everyone on the Fantic side deserve credit as well. I think Coldenhoff's career as well, as it's now starting to form a more rounded picture, is deserving of some props. I mean, he's had 450 podiums with Suzuki, KTM, GasGas, Yamaha, Fantic. Like, it's all quite spectacular, and I think if you'd asked anyone, I mean, let's not forget, the Yamaha years to begin with were bleak at best for Coldenhoff. That was just terrible at points. I still remember Mantova in 22, where he finished 17th, and the official quote said, "Oh, my suspension was off." And I remember being on a podcast saying, "You're Glenn Coldenhoff. You should be able to have 2 planks of wood in where your forks should be and finish higher than 17th." Point being, I think that a lot of people probably would have expected his career to have ended by now. So the fact that he's still a factory rider and still scoring these results, 2 podiums out of 4 rounds, I can't say enough good things.
Yeah, that pretty much sums him up. I think the Yamaha episode as well was extra disappointing because he had come off Austrian machinery where he had proven to be a Grand Prix winner. And I think moving to the factory team, which had probably the biggest set of resources around it at the time, it was seen as, the best possible move away from like a factory-backed Austrian setup. And, just didn't, like you said, didn't go so well at all. I mean, I think that hurt his career in an external sense because people said that he wasn't getting results, even though inside the paddock he was still, highly rated and revered for his personality, his professionalism, and the way he goes about trying to develop a motorcycle. So, Glenn's stock, I think, in one sense, kind of, an unseen way remained high, but now he's adding, results to it. Well, 4 Grand Prix, he's been on the podium twice. He's edging closer to that kind of consistency, that we saw a couple of years ago, and also that he showed in his last stint in MX2 before he picked up a knee injury. And, if he continues to accumulate those trophies, then I think he could be just like this random rider that you never would have figured to sort of keep Gajser not in close check, but at least in check.
Yeah, well put, I would say. And honestly, obviously, I didn't talk to Glenn for a couple of years because of some miscommunication, and it was, in hindsight, it was dumb. But honestly, one of my biggest regrets. I believed he was still really mad at me when actually, in hindsight, now he wasn't. But I believed for people telling me not to talk to him because he was going to punch me, which is ridiculous. But as you know me, Adam, you know that I would. If anyone says anything to me, I'm taking that as gospel. Yeah.
Well, at one point, I suggested he would be a fantastic test rider because things just seem to be not the results were not coming, and for the reasons I've just said. He's a good asset for any kind of factory. I mean, you can still expect him to fill the role of like the Brian Boger's testing mule for for KTM or WP suspension. That would be like for a guy who can, on his day still produce a fantastic top 5 podium threat, but then obviously is in the latter years of his career. But I think Glenn's proven that when he's fit, then he's a match for anyone. But and that's also surprising, I think. As ever with Glenn Coldenhoff, I mean, you remember he won that first Grand Prix for GasGas in Latvia. And then I think it was either a double header or a triple header in the COVID season. The following Grand Prix, he picked up like a back injury and pulled out. So it's that kind of sum things up where, the speed, the red bud, 2018 potential is there, but then, is closely followed by a mishap and he kind of drops away a little bit.
Yeah, and another point just to kind of shine a positive light on his career. In 11 450 seasons, he's had at least one podium in 9 of those. So that's good.
Yeah.
2018 and 2024 being the anomalies. It was 28. I'm trying to think, when was do you remember the preseason video of his bike locking up, I think, at Lommel, and then he just sort of endoed into a bomb hole type thing and broke his back? Was that Gasgas?
That was his first time back. No, that was his first time back at standing, I think.
Yeah, so that would have been Gasgas at that point, wouldn't it? No, that would have still been KTM.
Yeah, it would have been KTM.
Okay.
And I think it was 2018 because it was the same season that Jeffrey Herlings was injured. And then Coldenhoff came back, and I think it was from Lommel, actually. His form picked up, and he won something like the last 3 GPs of the season.
That was 19.
3 of the last 4. Was it 19?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, 18 was Herlings's...
Shining
that was his
moment.
masterpiece. So it's 19, yeah.
Yeah.
So because then we had the strange situation in MXGP, which we hadn't really had before, where you had 2 Dutchies just swapping moto wins at the end of the year.
Yeah, and we also had the strange situation that year, which many riders pointed out, that the top 3 finishers at the last however many Grand Prix were all started the season injured. And then it started a big debate about the fact of, is coming into the season healthy and 100% really a good thing?
Yeah. And the season was getting longer and longer.
Yeah.
I think, was it 20 Grand Prix in 2018? I mean, there was a lot of races.
For sure. So we also, in the same breath, full credit to Andrea Bonacorsi for another brilliant race. Not overly surprising because he's a great rider in the sand and he's a great rider overall. So I don't want to make too big a thing out of this because I think he's going to feature in the top 5 a lot moving forward. And we need to give Tim Gajser, of course, his credit. Moved forward after bad starts each time. Second moto was much better than the first. He was much more comfortable there. And he's continued his honour at one of 2 weak link GPs for Tim, if you want to call them that. He served well. So I don't think there's anything to really worry about or dig in there.
Can also just say, I thought it was quite interesting watching Bonacorsi and Coldenhoff circulating together because I would say Bonacorsi is maybe 8-9 years younger than Coldenhoff. Maybe I'm
more.
doing Glenn. Yeah, I don't know. Maybe I'm doing a disservice to Glenn here, but you could see in places where the Italian just had like more energy and more force, and you kind of thought, well, he's going to take this position here because he just seems to have more energy. But then, in the sand, Coldenhoff was able to use that kind of experience and that wiliness to take a few extra lines and save a few extra bumps here or there and kept ahead. But I like seeing the dynamic of the Fantic riders.
13 years difference between
13?
The 2. Yes.
Jesus.
Yes, it's shocking, isn't it?
And because he has a babysitter.
While we're on the subject of Fantic, Bogas was sick all week, so he just limped through the Grand Prix. I did have this question teed up for you, but I might stop it because we don't have much time and this can wait. So I'm just going to say it and then we can maybe move on.
Right.
Is Kevin Horgmo going to force a conversation at Honda HRC about whether him and Fernandez should or could be swapped for 2026 or beyond?
No.
Okay. That was you know what? Normally I'd be mad at that, but that's really helped us with our timeline and our efficiency. So we'll move on. My point being, I think that Horgmo has proven to be a match for Fernandez. Slow down, we don't need to rush this much. For Fernandez this year. And I think that if you look at it, similar to the Fernandez-Mitch Evans dynamic when Fernandez was on the satellite team and Evans was the HRC rider, I think that there could be room to start a conversation about maybe Kevin Horgmo showing that he deserves that shot. When Fernandez, in all honesty, maybe hasn't best utilised it over now a couple of seasons. But
I think, you still got to give Fernandez a bit of time after missing all of the last year of ACL. But I think you've got a great argument. You cannot discount what Horgmo's doing. I mean, 5th overall in Sardinia was another decent result. He's doing very much like a Calvin Verlandren. He's taking what limited means and then showing his potential. I think he's really sort of putting himself in the shop window as like the B rider of a factory team that could then make the next step up again. But then, we have to also maybe turn a little bit of that spotlight towards Isaac Gifting, Lewis, because, he's also showing some decent stuff on a 450. I mean, he's in his mid-20s, so it's not like he's a Coenen spring chicken, but, Gifting is also taking what essentially almost a stock Yamaha. He's outperforming the factory guys. He's getting good starts. I think, it would be interesting to see if he stays healthy and what he can do later on.
Yeah, two brilliant stories and two riders that could throw the cat amongst the pigeons silly season-wise come the end of 2025 for sure. Mentioning Horgmo, of course, he is able to compete with the factory riders competitively out of the gate and around the rugged, deep sand of Riola Sardo, thanks to the support that he and the Honda SR Motor Blues Motul team have from Prox. Prox is your one-stop shop for all of the parts that you need for your motorcycle. Head to pro-x.com, select your ride list for year, make, and model, and they will show you all of the products that they have available for your steed. For instance, right now, I will put in 2021 KTM. Let's go for a 50. Let's really change this up. So let's say you've got a kid, 6 years old. What does Prox have? A wide variety of things. Water pump, lower shock bearing kit, piston kit, front wheel bearing set, piston pin bearing, air filter. More than I can even begin to list. That is the convenience and the quality as well that is available at Prox. There's a reason why if you're a privateer, you go to Prox. And in fact, there is a privateer who will be going to Prox starting at the Grand Prix of Trentino. So we'll talk about that next week. But also, Prox are sponsoring a all-access type video from the 2025 ACU British Championship. So maybe head to YouTube and watch that as well, because it's a good look at the series and it's backed by one of our close friends in Prox. So thank you to them. Right. It is time, and it's amazing that it's taken this long. Jeffrey Herlings is back, and
What?
What?
You're not going to go next on the list? I mean, you're not going to get to Ben Watson?
I feel like we have waited. I feel like people wanted us to lead with Herlings. No?
Oh, right.
Like, I feel like people are probably waiting for this. You cannot tell me...
Disappointing?
Oh, Adam, we had the fastest lap of race day.
Yeah, that's true.
We had the speed. We put the competition on notice. Not to criticize the guy who writes the KTM-PR, but if I was writing the KTM-PR, headline would have been Jeffrey Herlings puts everyone on notice.
Right, okay.
I would have used the KTM-PR as a sort of aggression tactic to the field.
Okay, we'll talk about the merits of Jeffrey's return in a moment, because I think it was still impressive considering what he said afterwards to numerous sources, that he's had, 5-6 days on the bike since he had, a full knee reconstruction at the end of October last year. But was it weirder to see Jeffrey Herlings in 20th place, picking up just 1 point? I'd like to know if he's ever finished in 20th place in his whole career, or the fact that he got a whole shot and led the second moto, because I mean, Herlings probably gets 2 to 3 whole shots a whole season.
Well, no, but this is the beauty of that second moto. I slowed down the first corner. He came out of the first corner in 9th. Don't try and explain to me how he got to first in 3 corners, because I don't understand that.
Right.
But
yeah, it wasn't a whole shot. Yes, it was. Yeah, right,
but still, like, I think most people would think he left the first turn in 3rd or 4th. He left the first turn in 9th. And somehow was in the lead. And not only did he take the lead, he had like a 5-second lead by the end of the first lap. Like, this is the type of spark that Jeffrey brings to MXGP. And when he's got just 1 lap in him, it's still enough to just fuel this tornado of emotion and excitement. And once again, you cannot tell me that I'm wrong on this. Jeffrey Herlings brings a certain flavour to MXGP that when he retires, MXGP and in front will really, really feel the effect of. Because I had more people talk to me about Sardinia in Foxborough than I did talk to me about Argentina. This was to the outside world the real round one, because this anomaly, this mystical creature, had returned. Also, a lot of people were pulled me aside and went, 23rd in qualifying. Oh, I thought you said he was going to be good. And I made everyone found this hilarious because my reply was simply to everyone, we've been through a lot. Which is true. We've been through a lot. But no. You know what? In hindsight, having higher expectations was a bit ludicrous. But maybe not entirely ludicrous because what we saw in that second moto first lap was what we were all holding on to, or what we knew was in there. So, yeah. Your thoughts?
Mentioning the whole shot was obviously inaccurate because he didn't get it. But then I think it was more just the fact of seeing him in P1 so early on. That's what I was alluding to more. To be honest, without really knowing, because I think Jeffrey Herlings' form and fitness is usually a mystery. I mean, we all know he rides a lot. He still does. It's been like his MO throughout his career. But no one really knew what he was capable of. I honestly thought he would finish top 6 or something like that.
Yeah, so did I.
Around the sand in Sardinia. And to see him sort of labouring like that on Saturday was a little bit of an alarm bell. If there's one consistent thing as well also with Jeffrey throughout his career is that when he's come back from injury, he always has this chronic phase of an arm pump, and it can last a moto or it can last a GP. Sometimes it only lasts a couple of laps, and then he's able to power forward. So I think, I certainly sort of forgot about that.
Yeah, same.
I think, just assuming that it was sand and it was going to be the ideal scenario for him to return to action. Plus, I think there was some enthusiasm, as you hinted at, like, the Supercross, to see the 84 back there. I think we have to be far more realistic. And also, I'm not expecting that much more in Arco this weekend. I mean, if he does get near a whole shot, then that's going to help him enormously. But then I think also he's firmly in a process. I wouldn't say we're going to see anything resembling normal service from Jeffrey Herlings for another 2 to 3 rounds.
Yeah, well, he told me a while ago that mid-May was his target to kind of be winning and back to 100%. So I guess if we work on that timeline, we've got 3 or 4 more rounds. But I do think Trentino will go better simply because it will be less physically taxing. And quietly, he's really good at Trentino, despite it being quite a departure from the sand. I do want to clarify that emotional spiel that I just ran about Jeffrey Herlings will come under some fire because people will think that I'm just blowing smoke and fanboy, for lack of a better term. It's genuinely how I feel. And I don't really see how anyone can disagree with it.
But then it's part of your bias just due to a personal connection and the fact that, you've had some pretty memorable interviews with him.
Well, I think he's a dick. No, you don't. What, you disagree?
No, I agree.
I just don't see how you can disagree.
I agree, but I don't hype it up. I don't think it should be as hyped up as much as you think it should.
What? But what? Are you talking about his impact on the series?
Yeah, his potency as a world figure of motocross. I just think there's been that many injuries and that many setbacks that you have to give him time. I mean, you have to give him like that Eli Tomac sort of period to get back up to the level that we remember, if it happens at all. I mean, I still think that's a valid question mark every time he has a serious absence from action. And, again, we still need to see the best Jeffrey Herlings, the rider we remember from 2021 or 2018. I think there's still, the jury is in and out. I mean, the jury are fucked off by now because they're sitting down, then they're up again, they're being sequestered and all sorts, and, Jeffrey is an asset to MXGP. Absolutely. That's where I agree with you. But he has to come back again. And I just wish he would stop fucking coming back and actually just, have some dogfights with Febvre and Gajser.
Yeah, but I don't think I'm disagreeing with any of that because I'm not sat here saying he would have been world champion or he will be world champion or there's going to be 1 million Grand Prix wins. I'm merely talking about his aura within the paddock.
Yeah, and I understand that, especially when you're at Supercross and people are saying, now we're interested in MXGP. That's tangible.
Yeah, and I think this is also something that KTM must consider because, again, his contract is up this year. And if they don't renew him, just imagine the fanfare that will be around Jeffrey Herlings' debut on a new bike and how will it go and is he going to be imagine the publicity that will garner.
Well, but I mean, do you reckon they're in a staring match at the moment, KTM and Herlings? Because, realistically, if you're KTM, if you're Pit Buyer, you must be saying, well, where else are you going to go, Jeffrey? Are you going to, land into a brand new team and learn the customs and the idiosyncrasies of another factory setup? And if KTM want to let him go, maybe it is only a financial thing. And then what other kind of factory is suddenly going to have the economic clout to give Jeffrey Herlings a contract?
I think another manufacturer in tandem with Monster would probably give him a pay rise. And I think that honestly it would be justified because the marketing alone would pay for that. Jeffrey is the golden goose that certain manufacturers and certainly Monster Energy have wanted for over 10 years. And I think that finally getting that would pay dividends whether he's on the sidelines in 20th place or in first place. Ultimately, you'll probably get a mix of all of that in the space of half a season.
I agree. Much in the same way that some teams were trying to sign Dean Wilson back in the day, with the knowledge that a name like that would bring in extra sponsors and extra budget to cover the elevated salary that he would demand. But Herlings is going to go to a factory team with long-standing suppliers, long-standing agreements. I don't think the commercial impact would be that big where, it just makes him an essential massive outlay for anyone.
But also, I don't know. I disagree. I think that everyone would be more than happy to have that conversation if they find out he's open, which he technically will be potentially.
He could do like a Ken Roxon. I mean, Standing Construct could suddenly resurrect. With like a Jeffrey Herlings in a semi sort of factory setup. I mean, that would be kind of exciting.
I keep thinking Triumph and Monster in tandem.
Do you think Triumph have enough money to?
I don't know. I think they can probably find it.
Well, I would have thought they would be trying to invest more in their Supercross setup rather than.
Well, there's also the potential of Eli Tomac going to Triumph, so I guess throw those juggling balls up and one of them might land. I don't know.
Ducati try and sign him up for an AMA Nationals campaign in 2026 and then selected MXGPs. I don't know.
Oh.
There you go.
Oh. Also, okay, so I just justified that what I said wasn't fandom and was none of that. Let me just now say something that was not serious, but everyone will now take this serious. On that Friday in Foxborough, I walked under the KTM tent and Chase was sat there and I said, I've just come here because I'm feeling sad this weekend and I wanted to get near a KTM rider with Oakley goggles and Alpine Stars gear. And if I squint, I can see an 8 next to your 4, and then it's like I'm just right where I need to be. Which obviously was a joke.
Laugh in your face.
He told me to get out, but I did. Instead, I countered that by pulling up 2021 MXGP highlights.
But he didn't say you have an attractive face.
No, not this time.
Yeah.
Okay. But no, I genuinely, I don't know how to justify this because I just believe it. Jeffrey Herlings is Jeffrey Herlings, and that brings a certain mystique. But moving on, because
one quick question, Lewis. Would it ruin you if you saw the 84 in like Kawasaki green with Monster?
Yes.
Because it would not be the same. It would not be the same figure, would it? It has to be orange. It has to be Red Bull.
Yes, but then again. So let's say in a hypothetical situation, Jeffrey Herlings does leave KTM and go to another manufacturer. To rewind to last year and our Prado discussion, honestly, gear company, energy drink, bike, fucking exhaust, all of those companies better sit down in a boardroom and go like, we can't blow this. We need to make this. First of all, they should call me. And I'll be happy to take all that money. But no, like genuinely, like if that were to happen, if someone blows it, I'd be shocked. But equally, KTM, as I've said before, KTM are in an equal situation because if they re-sign Jeffrey, it will likely be his last year. So you've got a just documentary, PRs, videos, social. You've got to absolutely drive that investment home as much as you possibly can.
Do you think Monster? Because I mean, he's going to have an energy drink, isn't he? Unless he does like a Marc Marquez and shows faith to Red Bull by not accepting a Monster deal, by riding for Triumph or someone else. Can you see Monster actually making a big deal about having Jeffrey Herlings in their stable? I mean, there wasn't a great fanfare about Jorge Prado to a degree.
I mean, they tried.
Tony Cairoli as well. I mean, that's, you can't get. There are very few bigger icons of motocross than Cairoli, and he wasn't feted either.
No, but that's their fault. Like, that's their fault. They're too busy making videos of riders doing backflips and stuff. Like
Yeah, we haven't had any lines from films yet. So to quote The Princess Bride, get used to the disappointment.
There actually was a line from a film earlier. You didn't pick it up.
Oh, really? Was it a Pixar film?
No.
Oh.
No, it was actually an adult film. The time is getting away from us, but we have to talk about Ben Watson. Once again, I started this whole Watson wagon malarkey before I'd ever had a conversation with Ben. Ever. And if you read our conversations now, you could argue we're barely friends, because it's quite horrific.
It's quite scathing, actually, on Twitter.
Thank you. I forgot about that. There you go. So that really that puts that to one side. There is zero relationship involved in this comment. This is why I've pratted on about Ben Watson for so many years, because there's something there. And there was a little hint of it. I don't even think it was worth celebrating that much, because to me it was just a flicker of the light of what is possible. 8th in Moto 1, 30 seconds behind the leader on the back of the lead group. 9th was a minute or so behind, so Ben went with the leaders. First time he's been up there in a long time, so I'd imagine that was a process in itself. Second moto, his beater died on the line. He sat there for 30 seconds, finally got going, and charged from dead last to 12th. I feel like it deserves some credit, and I, you know what? A lot of people have messaged me and said, fair play, maybe you were right. So I feel like it is opening some eyes, but I just feel like it's important to mention. That's all.
Yeah. More of the same, please, Ben. In Arco di Trento.
He's really good in Trentino.
Yeah, also, I mean, maybe he, the beater misses a beat and doesn't get off the line, but just show the lap time, show the potential, get involved in some fights on the track, put the bike into the top 10, and continue this upward trajectory, because I think it's rubbing off positively on riders like Valentin Guillot, who was just outside it again. A nod to also Romain de Moosdijk as well, who sort of popped up. Okay, it was sand for a Dutch rider, but still credit where it's due. Is there anyone else recent? Adam Sterry as well. It was good to see him racing MXGP again. 2 Brits in MXGP, blimey.
Three, Josh Gilbert. Points.
Oh, Josh Gilbert. Yeah, sorry, Josh. So just picking up points. It's a rare situation, but I know what you mean. We need to see this on a more regular basis from Ben.
Yes, but you agree with me. You concur that this isn't a flash in a pan. This is actually what should be considered the norm. I would argue that this should be considered the lower end of the norm almost. I said pre-season, I genuinely believe he can be a 5 to 8 rider consistently. I really do.
Yeah. And also, I think it does pay testament to there is some depth in MXGP. A rider of Ben's experience now. He's a Grand Prix winner, fantastic technique. He's an accomplished sand rider too. But it's not that easy to grab a top 10 in MXGP. So doff of the cap.
Yes, and to put it into layman's terms, the beater is slow. So that is a hindrance. Yeah, there was actually something I wanted to talk about with that, but we don't have time. So I'm going to...
MX2.
Yes, but I'm going to...
Shambles or, what have you worked out?
Well, I was going to pivot and do a quick summary of MX2 and then move on to the numbers and Cairoli to save time.
Do your summary.
Okay. Kai de Wolf went 1-1, crashed in the second moto, came back to pass Adamo right at the end, righted the ship somewhat after a inconsistent period, let's say. Some people believe that not having the character chase in Lucas Coenen which he had last year, is maybe a hindrance somewhat. But I think this almost breathed new life into him. So I think that you could see Kai now start to take more control of this championship. Camden McClellan was second, I believe his second Grand Prix podium, his first coming at this track last year. Common theory with Camden is that a track like this where you can go flat out and technique and finesse is less important, is where he shines. And that seems to ring true based on the results. Adamo and Lagenfelder are just going to be consistent all year long. I don't know how many GPs the pair will win, but you can bet on them being second, third, fourth, probably every single week, which means they'll factor into the title fight one way or another. Liam Everts was sick for 7 to 10 days pre-race, so was really just not feeling it. But he'll be better for Trentino, and actually is my pick to win in Trentino. Any of that you want to touch on?
Yeah, Liam won there last year in Arco de Trento.
Well, did he win there the last 2 years? I almost feel like
I'm not sure about 2023. 2023, I think, was his first podium there, didn't he?
Oh, maybe that's what I'm thinking of.
But yeah, he got the win there last year. Again, don't rule him out being able to get points when he's sort of facing some adversity. But yeah, good observations all. I'm going to start calling him Scary Sasha because, again, just a force to watch. But then you just wonder, what on earth is going to happen by the next corner? Kai, I think, was in just his element. And, this was a race where I feel he had to make a 1-1 almost just to reassert some authority on the class. And he did that. So, but I think MX2 is just giving us some decent names. I mean, Lagenfelder, we know his quality. And I know you feel somewhat indifferent to him, Lewis. 1 minute you're throwing a knife at him, the next minute you want to crown him or something. But you can't doubt his quality. I think he's got 2 podiums for the season. He's still up there in the championship, P2, P3,
8 points behind.
Yeah, so that's he's doing the job. I mean, you don't need to be. I don't think you need to be the Lucas Coenen to stretch Kai de Wolf this year. You just need to be ready to capitalize when Kai does something like he did in the second moto and have a big crash and hand the lead to Adamo, who I think you have to also give him immense credit because the way that he fought and held some of the inside lines, some of the more obvious lines, you could say, at the end of that second moto, you could sense that the attack was going to come from de Wolf. But then there was just a little part of me that thought if de Wolf just makes a single mistake and loses like that second and a half, then Adamo's going to be able to throttle this thing and take it home. So you could see how dejected he was when he crossed the line, and he really gave everything. But I think that was another positive vindication, if you like, for Adamo's credentials this year.
Yeah, you mentioned mistakes, and obviously we saw a lot of them on the track. People make mistakes off of the track as well. Some of those include not relying on Polisport. Hey, Yamaha YZ125 or 250 riders.
My God.
Was that not impressive?
Well, make sure you do this one better than the list of the Prox, because that slowed down a little bit.
Was that not impressive? That was such a segue. I thought that was some of my best work. Hey.
Yeah, but poor de Wolf, you went from giving him credit straight into a read.
Well, I thought it was great. Hey, Yamaha YZ125 or 250 riders, this one's for you. If you've been riding models from 2002 to 2021, listen up, because Polisport has something that's going to make your heart race. They are introducing the new restyling kit, a complete transformation for your Yamaha, giving your bike a 2024 look without any complicated modifications. The kit includes everything you need: a new gas tank, a full race seat, an airbox, all designed to fit seamlessly. No fuss, no hassle, just a fresh design that breathes new life into your dirt bike. Polisport has all that you need. And of course, Kevin Horgmo, Isaac Gifting, among others, rely on Polisport. So you should too. Thank you to Polisport and Prox, of course, for their support of this podcast. Numbers?
Yeah, but first of all, it was dispiriting, right? I mean, it was disappointing to see the MX2 gate like that. I was pretty shocked, when I sort of first turned on the pictures. And I think just from a visual side, which is obviously, maybe 5% of what we need to talk about as a problem, in front, just put some blocks there, put some screens, put something. If you've only got 16, 17 riders in the gate, then at least visually do something, not to make it look so crap or look like, Grand Prix racing is in a mire. I mean, just there are little tricks that can be done just to, not have that negative impact, from the first seconds. You can count the riders at a beginning of a Grand Prix weekend. There's an official entry list, and if there's someone's hurt or a team can't make it or whatever else. But for a World Championship category like that, there needs to be a little bit more consciousness, I think, towards the image of the sport.
Call me crazy, but I feel like a few years ago they were doing that. They were putting advertising boards over the gates, either side, like 10 on the inside, 10 on the outside. I don't know why they would have stopped. But you are 100% right about being more conscious to the image of the sport. That statement can be applied to just about every single facet of off-track activities in MXGP. There were 19 riders listed in the MX2 results. Overall classification, 18 started MX2 Moto 2. I focused on MX2 here because, and I think you'll agree, MX2 seems to be more of a problem than MXGP as of late. We certainly, I would argue, without having the numbers, I would argue that in the last 5 years, MX2 has had less riders than MXGP 85% of the time. So I ran some numbers, trying to find a pattern, something that we can maybe lean on to explain this this deficit in entries. First of all, and I think it's important to note, Trentino to Riola Sardo is 14 hours driving. The ferry is 39 euros, which may not be relevant, but this is what we're doing. From Lommel to...
for a truck? It's got to be more than that.
Yeah, you know what? That's for us. That's for a Ford Fiesta.
Pedestrian carrying a rucksack, Lewis, or something.
So, if they wanted to, they could have walked onto the ferry and saved money. If there are
ridden their bike, to put the railing.
To put my in front cap on here, there are alternatives available. But from Lommel to Riola Sardo is 22 hours and 29 minutes of driving. So to be clear, although Riola Sardo is technically Italy, it's a far cry from Maggiora, Trentino, Mantova, what other venue you want to list. So that partly explains it. We had no Mathis Valin. He was ruled out with his hand injury. No Guillaume Fares after his free practice crash in France. No Oriol Oliver. He split from his team. No Mike Guerda. He was racing in Switzerland's national championship, which naturally is more important to him as a Swiss rider. No Burs Pagel, because he's only running an abbreviated schedule of Trentino, Tuchental, Lockett, and Udavala. I told you. We got the data.
No, but you're just picking individual cases that are adding a number of 5 or 6 riders, which are obviously going to be missing at every Grand Prix anyway because of injury or whatever.
Well, this is that was my prelude. Now we're getting into the hard numbers. So I think you'll agree that anywhere from 20 to 26 is a bad look, but entries below 20 is when we draw the line as this is unacceptable. So I went back through every single MX2 Grand Prix since Youthstream in front took over in 2004, and we have had 11 instances where there have been less than 20 riders in MX2. Those are 19 in China last year, 18 in Turkey in 2023, 19 in Sweden in 2023, 20 in Indonesia in 2023, 19 in St. Jean in 2022, which to me is still the most startling, 15 in Indonesia in 2022, 17 in Argentina in 2022, 19 in Indonesia 2019, 18 Indonesia 2018, 20 Mexico 2016, and 18 Mexico 2015. So the first time we had sub 20 was Mexico 2018, which was the penultimate round. There's some explanation for that penultimate round. I believe 2015 was the first year that we really kind of elevated the number of flyaways again. I think the flyaways are a separate conversation. So let's strike those from the record and just look at St. Jean, Sweden, Turkey, and now Sardinia.
It starts to drop off just a little bit then pre-pandemic. But then after the pandemic, most of those numbers are coming more from 2021 onwards.
Yeah, but curious to me, the COVID years, 2020 and 2021, there's no example of below 20, which is the years when you would probably think it would be.
No, because that's when the championship was contained to, very few venues and multiple events at the same track. It was probably the most cost-effective
Yeah, that's true.
championship ever. And also that's where, you have to give immense credit for in-front motor racing with all the restrictions and the hassle that was involved in public events at the time. They still managed to create a world championship. And, I think the paddock, I think they traded on that for a couple of years, and the paddock gave them leeway because they essentially kept the sport running when it could have been closed down and faced a situation that set it back by years. So that's something to do with it, but I think it has to also go hand in hand with the rise of EMX 250, as we've mentioned many times on this podcast. But I think my quick, just to get straight to the point, Lewis, my idea would be from 2026. You keep the same points for the MXGP class, but you need to create a separate championship within a championship. You need to reward satellite or privateer teams and give them some sort of benefit each weekend to make the investment to travel and to get to places and participate in the series when they don't have the big backing of the manufacturers or the sponsors. Whether that is some sort of formalization of a parc fermé. You get these riders on the camera having a TV interview. Take Ben Watson, for example. Okay, he's a bad example because he's representing the Beta Factory. But I take Adam Sterry. If he turns up and his team have made the investments to do, a certain amount of Grand Prix, if he's the top finisher, or Valentin Guillot, he should be interviewed with the top three. We barely see him on track. There's barely any exposure at all for what he's doing. In terms of coverage of the championship, he needs to be highlighted in some way, whether that's an interview, whether that's dedicated TV coverage, that needs to be worked out. Keep that in the MXGP class. But MX2, only count points to the top 15. Getting points in MX2 needs to be some sort of, it needs to be highly valued. You just listed there a number of events where there have been less than 20 riders. You should not be able to turn up as an amateur and score a Grand Prix point by virtue of the fact that there's not enough fuckers in the gate. So you need to limit that to the top 15 and then create, again, an opportunity inside the MX2 class where riders want to be there, where they're the top riders in the European Championship and an Asian Championship and a South American Championship. They need to be able to come to a Grand Prix and feel there's a sense of worth of competing in this particular category. So, maybe that's with points. Maybe that is another, some sort of, as we mentioned before, if you're an EMX 250, you get elevated to MX2 for a certain level of distinction or achievement. And then, as you said before, EMX 250 and European Championships need their own kind of promotional channels whereby they're not conflicting with World Championship status. There has to be a clear step. Because at the moment, there's a preference for being European champion or doing the European Championship as opposed to MX2.
Yeah, or simplify all of that and get rid of MX2, make EMX 250 basically go EMX 250 to MXGP. So you're either an amateur or a pro.
Yeah, absolutely.
We're getting to that point we're getting to that point where drastic measures could and should be taken, arguably.
Yeah, and also think if you're a manufacturer, you have young riders competing on essentially stock bikes. There's no European Championship teams that are spending millions developing and squeezing every single ounce of horsepower out of these engines. Of course, there are people with more resources than others, and there are some European Championship teams that are Grand Prix spec. I mean, they're making fantastic investments to be competitive. But otherwise, just make it EMX 250. That's it. That's your 250 class for young riders. It would stop people and brands having to invest silly amounts of money to try and get that extra horsepower out of those quarter-liter engines, and transform it that way.
Funny, it just needs to be an effort from everyone. Like when I was in MXGP full-time, a few people wanted me to interview EMX 250 riders, and I was just like, no, I'm not contributing to the blurred lines where now I go like, hey, here's a post-race interview with Jeffrey Herlings and this fucker who just got 7th in EMX 150. The blurred lines need to stop. Speaking of EMX, I took my data further. So from that list I just mentioned, I was trying to find one that was kind of similar to Sardinia. So I went with Sweden because it's in Europe, but it's technically a more expensive trip. It's a little far away. Yeah. So I've tracked Sweden every year since 2014. how do I communicate this? So these are the MX2 entries for Sweden. 2024, 24, 2023, 19, 2022, 23, 2019, 31, 2017, 34. 2015, 25, 2014, 32, 2013, 30, 2012, 40. So what stands out from that? The numbers 34 and 40. Fair? Fair.
Yeah.
Those 2 years, there was no EMX 250 in Sweden.
There you go.
2024, 24 entries, there was EMX 250. 2023, 19, EMX 250. 2022, 23, EMX 250. Now, admittedly, 2019, 31, there was EMX 250 on that day. So that, to provide both sides, there is that. But then, as I said, 2017, 34, no EMX 250. Now, how about this for Sweden? And maybe this isn't EMX 250, maybe this is a bigger issue, but EMX 250 first started running alongside these events in 2012, I believe. From 2011 below, MX2 entries for Sweden: 40, 38, 38, 32, 31, 32, 31, 31. So much more consistent.
And also, wasn't 2010 the first year of the 23 age rule?
Yes.
That might also come into it. That was around a similar time. I mean, that's when you had people like, pick a name, it wasn't relevant at the time, but somebody like, Andrea Bartolini or Kiko Chiodi, these older guys who had still had the option to race 250s in the mid-noughties. That kind of, the MX2 option was closed to them. And, I think there are some merits to having a development class that pushes into the Premier class, and I understand Infront's reason for doing it. But, when you turn on the TV and you see half a gate, this is not positive in any way for the championship. And I think, a quick fix or certainly some sort of fix needs to happen. Just for some of the reasons or some of the solutions I mentioned earlier.
Yeah, it's alarming. And although I would argue that with all of these numbers that I've just reeled off, there's perhaps not as much of a clear pattern as I was expecting, there are certainly trends that you could latch onto and probably replicate with other events, not just Sweden.
Well, it is confusing because, Triumph as a new manufacturer coming with a 250, they're not saying, right, we're coming in with a 450. Also, as we said, developing a 250 is costly, but then it's also the right platform for a younger rider to step up from a 125. I mean, there was that whole argument years ago about Jeffrey Herlings being too young. Lucas Coenen as well. There was far less of it, but there's still some talk about him being, in his late teens and stepping onto a 450 in the Premier class. I just don't think it's that sustainable, Lewis, and I'd like to see MXGP be more welcome to, not so afraid of change, especially when it comes to the structure of the classes and the potential and how they link together. That's how maybe the next change in the sport should come. I mean, we've had qualifying races and then we've had qualifying races carrying points, but then, keep doing it, keep trying to work out how to filter the next sort of generations of talent into GP racing, because at the moment it seems that not many riders are aspiring to be in the MX2 class, or brands or teams.
Yeah, which is ultimately the biggest fundamental issue, I think. The glory hunting approach of the world now. Everyone wants a trophy. What looks better on Instagram, etc., etc. I do think that plays a role. Just to zero in on one point specifically, the first time the EMX 250 raced in Sweden was 2013, and that was the first time the MX2 gate went below 30. So there's an immediate impact there that is noticed. And I also wanted to say... a lot of people are going to blame this on Infront. Entry fees, costs, it's too much. Well, Giuseppe Luongo, who was arguably more aggressive than David, fair? I think we've kind of backed down.
That's fair.
If that was true, then you would see the numbers dwindle more so from 2004 to 2014. But actually, that's when it was at its strongest. So I don't think you can just throw a blanket over this and say, Infront, they're costing too much, they're ruining the sport, which is what the uneducated's go-to bat is.
Yeah, I mean, European Championship riders is a good money-making scheme. I mean, the championship based on the entries and people trying to get in seems healthy. So I don't think you can do an over like a swift overhaul, but just refine it, make it more important, make it more significant, and then also try not to squeeze out your world championship category at the same time, because that in the end is also what people see more of. That's what they're switching on the app or the TV to see.
Yeah, realistically, no one has ever said to me, "Did you watch the MX250 at a weekend?" Like, it's still MXGP
Yeah.
and MX2, which is almost out of touch with what is happening. Because at this point,
Yeah.
you may as well just watch whatever class you want, because they're all the same. Great talk. Let's end with this. Cairoli, he is filling in for Mattia Guadagnini this weekend at the MXGP of Trentino. Somewhat of a surprise. There are heavy rumours, or it's going to happen, that he will race Ducati at Redbud this year for a round of Pro Motocross. But I had not really heard any rumours about an MXGP appearance. Where do you think he finishes? Does he beat Sewer?
No. I think the best Tony could hope for is, again, using that Ducati power, getting a great start, sending the crowd crazy by being at the front for a couple of laps, maybe having a decent battle with somebody. But I think it's unfair and unrealistic to expect him to do two 35-minute motos, near the top 10. So I think he would just be looking to put on a show and be looking to put that bike kind of at the forefront of everyone's consciousness for the weekend. And that's the box ticked.
Yeah, I would put him somewhere between 14 and 18. No disrespect, but I don't think he's necessarily prepared for this. Again, I don't think this was on the plan since November.
Yeah, he's been chucked in.
Yeah. And as much as you look at Antonio Cairoli and everything he's done and you think, oh, he'll beat Isaac Gifting and Ben Watson, as you mentioned earlier, the depth in MXGP is greater than maybe the names would indicate. So,
yeah,
I think that...
I think it's, yeah. Sorry, Lewis, to cut you off. I think it's amazing that at 39 years old and just becoming a dad for the second time, only a couple of weeks ago, I think it's amazing that he's able to get on the bike and get in an MXGP gate. That alone in itself is totally worthy and just shows how much of a class act and what a talent he is.
Yes, I concur with that. And hey, round 4, we had Herlings back. Round 5, we have Cairoli back. What next? It's really exciting. Yeah. Or maybe we go Josh Coppins. Really.
No, get Paulin back on a Yamaha. Get DeSalle in on a Triumph.
I'm surprised Paulin hasn't been more at the forefront since he retired. He's still quite busy with like Yamaha and 100% and people, but like
he's got his ambassador role, whereas I say DeSalle's probably got more of an active role for Triumph. But you joke about Josh Coppins, but Coppins Jr., Townley Jr., there are Kiwis working their way up through the system.
Yeah, that in itself is exciting. And they're in EMX125, so it's fine. They're not contributing to the problem. But yes, any final thoughts?
No. I'll go to Trento next. Small circuit, spectacular. Very scenic, likely to be busy. We're going to look busy anyway because they pack the fans into those small enclosures. Just happy that I'm not having to find a parking spot.
Yes, that is... the American mind would not be able to comprehend what that event is.
Well, there is a certain quaint poetry in trying to park your car into a very, very thin set of fencing in a vineyard, bumping sort of wine berries out of the way with your sunroof.
I do miss Trentino. Trentino is one that I would like to get to fairly soon. Obviously, this weekend isn't going to happen. But my final thought is that Trentino will have plus 30 riders in each class, I would imagine. So that is, maybe I'll be proven wrong, but Trentino is normally a strong one. Honestly, it's one of the best Grand Prix we have, and this should be great racing, great lineup, great atmosphere, great photos. It should really be a nice example of what MXGP is.
And also full credit to the track crew and the organisation there, because they could leave that place and not really work on it, and it would be hellish. But they actually make a serious effort to prepare the track. whether they're trying to turn it over because it's pretty stony, or they reverse it, or they put new features in it. I think with a kind of limited palette, they do try to sort of create something that's watchable and like you say, a distinctive part of the championship.
I can't think of a better way to end this podcast than with this statement, which I think you'll love. Again, in the Foxborough pits, I hear, "Lewis, come here." So scurry on over. We've got a question. Okay, what's your question? Where's Brian Sue? And I'm just like, my reply was literally, once a year, that question comes up, and this is it, and no one knows. He's probably playing the violin somewhere. Or maybe he's going to turn up to Trentino in a Ferrari again. Or somewhere in between those two elements, which are quite far apart. No one knows where
playing
Brian
a violin while driving a Ferrari.
Honestly, that was a wild. So for people that don't know, Brian Sue is just weird. He turned up to Trentino for his first Grand Prix of the year in 2021 in a Ferrari, a legit Ferrari, with his number in stickers on the side, and it wasn't even his Ferrari. So he put his number on someone else's Ferrari, and then he disappeared again. Okay, that was literally, he came and he went with that, which is bizarre. But anyway, you are off to Qatar.
Yes, back next week to talk Arco de Trento.
Yes, you will do it from Qatar. I will do it from wherever I'm going, which I forget. But this has been a great episode. I think a lot crammed in, a little bit rushed. So sorry about that. But we're at 1 hour and 26 minutes, and we didn't even touch on MX2. So I'm not quite sure how we got to this point. But a lot happening in MXGP, good and bad. A lot to get to. So hopefully you feel as though we have scratched that itch. Thank you to Prox and Polisport once more, and we will see you in 7 days' time to recap the Grand Prix of Trentino. Thanks for watching and listening.